Okay. Hello, my name is Carl Selkin. I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Social Justice Committee of Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center. Our committee responds to societal conditions and contemporary issues based on traditional Jewish values and the prophetic admonition, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. This webinar is a clarion call to take action to protect the constitutional rights of citizens to register and cast a ballot, and to ensure that every ballot is counted so that the choice of the voters is inviolable. It is so difficult to believe that these basic tenets of American democracy are once again being challenged and eroded, but they are, and we cannot stand idly by. The first step is to show up, and here we are. The second is to learn the facts, which are explored by the short documentary you will watch today and the full-length documentaries to which you will be given access. Share them broadly. The third step is to join with others to make sure that the obstructions to voting are removed. Today, we ask that you use the Q&A to do two things. First, pose questions to the panelists that will help us all learn more about what we need to know and do. Second, share the names of the organizations that work effectively to get the job done. We know that success takes planning, it takes action, it takes commitment. Today, we each need to make that firm commitment and take action. Just as we did when we mobilized voters in 2020 by encouraging individuals to make a conscious and conscientious plan to vote, providing the broadest access to the full spectrum of committed organizations will give us each more resources to take this step. My colleague from the Social Justice Committee and one of its founders, Peter Braun, will introduce and interview filmmaker and president of Brave New Films, Robert Greenwald. Mr. Greenwald will introduce a short sequel that builds on his earlier award-winning films documenting this battle. He will be joined by his colleague from Brave New Films, program manager Carmen Samuel. During the final 20 minutes or so of this hour-long program, we will raise and discuss as many of the questions from you as possible. Peter Braun is on the faculty of the University of Southern California, Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work, and was director of the Alzheimer's Association for over 20 years. His history of activism includes influential roles in J Street and in California Democratic Party politics. I am pleased to hand the mic to Peter to introduce Robert Greenwald. Peter?
Carl, thank you. Welcome to our showing of Suppress 2020, the War on Democracy. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend, award-winning director and producer and documentary filmmaker, Robert Greenwald. Robert created the nonprofit film company, Brave New Films, to educate, influence, and empower viewers to take action around issues that matter, as the company has stated. He created today's film as an updated version of Suppress 2020, the fight to vote, to encourage us to be involved at the federal, state, and local level to protect our right to vote. Today, we are showing a short version of the updated film. Following the film, as Carl said, you will have an opportunity to post questions to Robert in the Q&A. As a registrant to today's program, you'll also receive a discussion and resource guide following today's event about the film, information from Brave New Films about the issue, and about opportunities for involvement with organizations engaged in fighting voter suppression and ensuring our constitutional right to vote. So it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Greenwald, who will share with us about his film, its past impact, and the current need for action moving forward. Robert.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Carl, and the hundreds of folks who are joining us this morning for the discussion for the short film. And most importantly, as Peter has said and Carl has said, and Carmen from Brave New Films will be speaking with me, will say, it's the actions that need to be taken. The film itself, the original version started, it was just going to be a short piece. And as we did the research and as the amazing women and men at Brave New Films kept finding in Georgia story after story, it moved from a 3-minute piece to a 5-minute. And then the more stories we heard, the more we were in touch with truly, truly patriotic Americans in the best sense of the word, who were being deprived of their right to vote, the more we felt we needed to do a longer film. And it wound up being for 2020, we had 2020 free screenings all around the country, heavily in Georgia. And we were able to hopefully educate people, work with many other groups. And it's now a cliche, but it's also accurate. It takes a village. And the film is a tool. It's a tool to build that village, to energize that village, to motivate that village, so that each and every one of us knows there is something we can do, something we must do, something we will do. So without further ado, I'd like to show the short film. And then right afterwards, Carmen and I will be speaking with Peter and answering your questions. And Carmen will let you know what you can do and how you can access the full film. So Andrea or Carl or Peter, it's all yours to show the film.
So sound, there's no sound, there's no sound. There's no sound.
Andrea, I'm not getting any sound.
Walls around the ballot box. In the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where Biden sealed his victory, Republicans have proposed 15 new voter suppression bills. Among these are a slew of new photo ID laws. Pennsylvania lawmakers are also looking to expand arbitrary voter roll purges. The only way to fight hundreds of voter suppression laws is through sweeping national legislation.
The best solution is that we have action by Congress, that H.R. 1, the For the People Act, have for the protection of democracy.
In Georgia, where Biden narrowly flipped the state by nearly 12,000 votes, Republican legislators have proposed 22 voter suppression bills.
There are those who are trying to compromise the voices of the electorate so that politicians can pick their voters rather than have voters pick those who would represent them.
One of these bills in Georgia would end automatic voter registration. An even more blatant attack on African American voters in Georgia is the proposal to eliminate early voting on Sundays. It is a way to go after souls to the polls. Where Black churches on Sunday have their congregations get on buses and go to the polls to vote.
Black voters in Georgia are 30% of the electorate, but made up 37% of Sunday voters.
After Biden's close win in Arizona, Republicans there have proposed 22 of their own voter suppression bills. One of Arizona Republicans' most flagrant bills requires absentee ballots to be notarized. We're asking them to go out and go find a notary, an additional hurdle in order to exercise their right to vote. Nearly half of all Americans who voted by mail in the 2020 election. One of the most egregious proposals from Arizona state legislature would give them the power to assign the state's electoral college votes to whomever the state legislature wanted, not whomever the people in the majority voted for.
Judges in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia have all thrown out lawsuits from the Trump administration.
Another Trump lawsuit now dismissed. No evidence. No evidence. Cases thrown out.
The Justice Department has found no evidence of voting fraud.
Tossing out his election challenge.
Trump has lost 59 lawsuits.
The U.S. Supreme Court rejecting that lawsuit.
It is more likely that Americans will be struck by lightning than commit voter fraud. More Americans will give birth to triplets than commit voter fraud. You are more likely to be injured by a toilet than commit voter fraud.
Voter fraud is a myth. It does not exist. But voter suppression is real.
This is clearly about race.
This is really a new form of Jim Crow. They are targeting the voting methods that were used the most by Black voters, and those very voting methods that led to higher turnout. Those are the things that are on the chopping block right now.
I don't want everybody to vote. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the election quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down.
They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
We just had record turnout, and it was the most secure election in American history. Republicans are working overtime to stop you from voting. We can defeat these Jim Crow-like voter suppression efforts by supporting the For the People Act, a nationwide bill that would protect your right to vote.
I urge each and every one of our colleagues to support this bill. Today, we are able to do our part in this long fight for the very soul of our nation.
Now it's up to all of us to get the For the People Act passed.
So you have a little background noise there. So Robert, thank you for your remarkable work in engaging us in the fight against voter suppression. As you've already said, your vision is more than the showing of this powerful film. It's a clarion call to action and organizing, and as I've heard you say over the years, sharp elbows. So, Robert, I'd like you to come back on, as we say, and after you introduce Carmen Samuel, your program associate, I will be posing a series of questions. And I also want to remind everyone to pose your questions to Robert in the Q&A. Robert.
Thank you, Peter. So just a very brief update that most of you who are on the call this morning probably aware, which is the effort for a national piece of legislation that would solve many of these problems has not happened, which is bad news. The good news is it forces each and every one of us to figure out what are we going to do and what is the work that can and should and must be done in our state, in our city, in our community. And let's name the names here. This is a racist attack of the worst kind that many of us thought we would never be fighting again. People gave their lives to be able to vote. And here we are in this year, once again, hopefully lives won't have to be given, but once again, fighting an essential fight so that people who are done nothing other than be patriotic are being denied the right to vote. And I can't imagine a more critical and important fight. So I thank each and every one of you for joining us. As Peter said, this is a short 6-minute film, and Carmen Samuel, our wonderful program director, who's recently joined Brave New Films, will talk for a bit and explain how you can get the full film, how you can get a study guide. We're in the midst of updating it, so the new film, Suppressed and Sabotaged 2022, will be available in the first week of April, again, for free screenings all around the country. Carmen, you want to explain to folks?
Hi, folks. Good morning to you. Here in California with you. And thank you all so much to Peter and the whole team for putting on this program. I just wanted to let you all know, as Robert said, they're updating the film, Suppressed and Sabotage 2022. And we want you to sign up to screen that film. And you can do that by actually going online right now to register your group for a screening to receive all the materials, which would be the film download, and it would be the updated guide. And that can be found at bravenewfilms.org/suppress2022. And a lot of folks are wondering what you can do. And we believe here at Brave New Films that one of the things you can do is just spread awareness. And with awareness equals change. So right now, did you all want me to put the information into the link, Peter, or?
That's
Carmen, it's Andrea. You can put the link and all that information in the Q&A pod so every participant can see it.
Okay, great.
Good.
I'm going to do that right now, folks.
okay.
The current film is available here. If you all check the cat out, the chat, the Q&A is at fighttovote.org. And then I'm going to go ahead and put in Suppress 2022 for the new film.
And while Carmen's putting that in, I wanted to sort of throw out a question to everyone. The title we've been working with is Suppressed and Sabotaged. One of our colleagues suggested adding Suppressed, Sabotaged, and Subverted, all part of the title, because all three things are going on. So anyone who has thoughts or opinions about that, throw it up in the Q&A or let us know, or email Carmen or me directly. I'm Robert at bravenewfilms.org. Carmen, did you want to add anything else before Peter takes us back with some questions?
Nope, I am all set for now.
Good, thank you. Peter?
Yes, Carmen, thank you. Robert, I want to start by sharing with everyone the mission of Brave New Films, which is to champion social justice issues by using a model of media, education, and grassroots volunteer involvement that inspires, empowers, motivates, and teaches civic participation and makes a difference. As I've already said, while you are an award-winning filmmaker, your vision for Brave New Films was more than making a film, but to organize around key issues in terms of civic participation. So where I would begin is, why did you choose initially to make this film in focusing your efforts as a documentary filmmaker? And what has been your experience in terms of its impact?
Thank you, Peter. It's interesting. A big part of my job, and it's a fascinating, wonderful job that I'm fortunate to have, to be able to volunteer year after year in this job. A big part of it is deciding what to do, because that means deciding what not to do. And as the years have gone on, and Brave New Films is now, thank goodness, and thanks to many of you who've helped us financially to keep going, because we rely on contributions, 15 years. And each year there are more and more requests for telling the stories we tell. And so the decision-making, myself and my colleagues, around what to do and how to do it comes down to a couple of key factors. One of them is telling stories that aren't being told, and telling them, as I like to say, what we do is we put a face on policy. Look, film can't do everything. There are certain things. You see my collection, my partial collection of books behind me. Love books, love newspapers, love magazines, love blogs. But film can humanize, it can personalize, and it can reach many people who unfortunately don't read the books or the articles or the magazines. So in deciding to do this particular film, the first thing was anybody doing it? And they were not. The second thing was there a strong story to be told, which would not just be, as important as they are, would not just be limited to experts. Real living and breathing human beings who are being denied the right to vote because of political control, an effort to stop people, particularly people of color, from voting. And it was clear that wasn't being done. And these were folks who were willing and happy, maybe is too strong a word, but willing and able to speak with us. So that generated the initial decision to move forward, to make it a more than, as I said before, a 3 or 5 minute piece, and then to challenge ourselves, each and every one of the extraordinary, I can't stress it enough, the extraordinary women and men at Brave New Films, to get 2020 free screenings and to have people reach the study guides, and for people to screen it in their schools and their churches and their synagogues and their community centers and their bowling alleys and you name it. And there's been a screening of this film in many of these places. The technology is our friend in this case, because it allows anybody with a phone to screen someplace. You can literally do it in almost any venue. We now have the film available, and the new film will be available on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram stories, on TikTok. It's all across the board. So the key thing, though, is now in all of your hands, which is, will you use the film, as Carmen said, and she will explain any questions you have, how to get it, how to access it, but will you use it to do something? if we make the film and people don't use it to activate, to motivate for action, then we failed. I don't like to fail. In fact, I hate to fail. Still keeps me awake at night. So, and we don't want people to feel there's nothing can do. The problem is too overwhelming or too complicated. It's not. It's not. It's a problem of energizing and motivating every single person that each of us knows to say, this is the real deal. The time is now. Here's a free tool that you can use in a variety of ways, which we can talk about, to motivate and activate for change.
Thank you, Robert. So along those lines, to dig a little deeper, as you did research for the initial film and research for the updated film, the 2022 version, what are some responses to counter voter suppression that you found to be effective?
Well, it's in two steps, and speaking broad terms, the first step, and many of us were engaged in it, trying to get national legislation that would help part of the problem, not the full thing, part of it. Unfortunately, that has not come to pass. So as I was saying before, it's moved us more to a local focus. Now, the local focus in some ways is positive because there's a long-term trend among thoughtful people and people on the ground who believe that in these next years ahead, the changes are going to come more locally, more within your city or state or community. So a big part of it now will be forgetting our previous notion that there would be one-stop shopping, as I sometimes call it, one piece of legislation, one magical politician. That's not on the table. That's not going to happen. But what is the group on the ground in your community who you know about, who you've worked with, who you can research? Find that group. They can be a way into lots of different kinds of action. There are groups. There is using your social media to help spread the word. There is electoral efforts around ballots and ballot issues. There are lots of groups that are doing different kinds of actions from civil disobedience onward. And there's no one simple answer, unfortunately. But the good news, again, and it really is, there's a place for every single one of us, working the phones, writing letters, going online, for every single one of us to take action. And a long-winded answer to your question, Peter, there is no one thing we found, but what we have found for sure, and it's what Carmen said earlier, is energizing and activating, not just the people on this call, but every single one of you. I think the study shows has an average of like 130 social connections. Will you use those 130 connections? Every single one of the 100 plus people on the call, use those social connections, reach out, pass along the short film, sign up for a screening with Carmen, and then invite those 130 people. We are passionate, and I assume most of you are because you're on the call, but we are not a majority on this issue. We are definitely not. And again, people have all kinds of issues, economics and school and where they're living and getting food on the table and the horrors of COVID. There's a lot that people are juggling. So we need to reach out with compassion and grace and understanding and involve them. Because if we continue to lose the right to vote, many other horrors will be facing us on the horizon.
Powerful words. So, Robert, most of us on this program this morning are here in Blue, California. So my question to you as a longtime California, what can we Californians do to make the most difference? And you've already alluded to that. We don't live in Georgia or Texas, but what's the most effective tool, on the most effective way of organizing for we who are in Blue California?
Well, I look at it as a menu in a restaurant you love with a long menu of options, right? And if you're forced to choose one, maybe you'll choose 2 or 3 or 4. So I think there's a menu of possibilities. And I'll talk a little bit, and then Carmen can weigh in from the screening point of view. And so there's a menu of possibilities. What is your comfort level? And where is your interest? Are you a person who likes to get on the phone? Are you a person who prefers to write letters? The phones work in California. Internet works in California. Letter writing works in California. Getting on when soon as COVID restrictions allow, getting on a train or a plane or a bus and going to volunteer when asked, very important that when asked by people in local communities whose voting is being threatened. There are lawsuits all across the country, financial contributions. I have not found any one thing, Peter, as I was saying before, but I've certainly found that when people are aroused and they're willing to do things, that's so important. And that also leads to more people voting. So Carmen, do you want to add anything around how people can use the screenings and things?
Yeah, once again, it can be a motivating, galvanizing tool for folks who are supportive. And in the new guide, we're actually going to focus on ways in which folks can help outside of their traditional ways. Because right now, like as we said in the beginning of the call, the Voting Rights Act, John Lewis Act, did not pass. So right now, kind of the energy is around, well, how can we make sure that people are still able to vote with these new laws and these new rules, right? And so if we can get folks who have correct information, show the film, share the resources, we're going to speak actually next week with vote.org to get some information on who has the most accurate information and how can we spread the word, because as Robert said, we're all connected in some kind of way. There's several different degrees of separation, and if we can just get folks out to not only view the film and share information, who knows, the opportunities are endless. Me personally, I see in Arizona folks donate, this is just me, folks donating funds to a bus organization to get folks out to be able to drop their ballots right in person, and despite the rural issues, just anything that we can do to help folks that are in kind of the crossfire of these new laws. So the possibilities are endless. Get creative, and we're just using a film to help to spark those ideas.
So thank you, Carmen. We have several questions from our participants. And I know, Robert, you're a filmmaker. You're not a lawyer, but you really are. You've become an expert on this issue. As you've spoken this morning, it's quite evident. So as you've said, and as we all understand this morning, we lost at the federal level. The battle is now at the state level, and organizing at the state level. From your experience with the first film and in researching the updated 2022 film, what's your experience in terms of residents in Arizona and Georgia in terms of supporting those restrictions, or has it been, as you've been doing your research and as your associates have been talking with folks on the ground, that there is a groundswell of indignation about those restrictions?
Well, for sure, there's beyond a groundswell of indignation. There's pain, there's rage, there's despair, and there's looking for avenues. And our job with the film and with each and every one of you on this call is to do something to help and support and encourage those who are immediately affected by the suppression, by the subversion, and to say to them, here are tools, here is our support. No, we're not living next to you in Georgia or Florida or Arizona, but there are things that can be done. And let's be clear, again, when you're dealing with systemic racism of the worst kind, led by people whose only goal is to take away the vote from others so they can stay in office, that's not an easy fight. And it's not going to be something solved in 2 minutes. You know, I did a film about the Koch brothers years ago, and I learned a lot. They see it as a long-term battle. One of the Kochs, never remember which one, said he understands now what politicians are actors who read from a script, and he, the Koch brother, wants to write that script. So I would argue that's one of the things we can all do with the films. We're providing a script for the politicians, for our friends, for our colleagues, for the advocacy groups, for the media. What about the local newspaper, the small town local newspaper? Will they cover the film? Will they come to a screening? Will they write about you're hosting something in your home? There are so many things that have to be done. The part of the problem, frankly, is our own thinking and approach, which is, well, we'll push one button for one miraculous candidate or one piece of legislation, the problem was solved. No, that is not going to happen. And people who get into power and do everything they can to hold on to it are not going to go easily into the night. And so it's not an easy job. It's not an immediate job, but certainly on the long menu of possibilities, each and every one of you can do something. And I can tell you, Carmen is incredibly dedicated to make sure everybody who wants to will get the new film, will have the new film, will be able to screen it, will get a guide, she'll help take you through how to have a screening if you haven't done before. You haven't lived till you have 30 strangers come to your house and participate in the screening. I'm overstating it slightly, but I remember back in the day when we first started, people said, no one's ever gonna open up their homes to screenings, and turned out to be yes, some people would do it, but you don't have to open up your home. There are many, many options along the way.
So along those lines, Robert, I look to you as filmmaker and organizer and progressive activist. From your own perspective, how do you measure success? Is success empowering people through the film? Is success measured in changing these horrific laws on the ground? How do you measure success?
Well, you're speaking to a highly neurotic New Yorker, so I may not be able to sort of give the most rational answer to that, because what's that expression? Keep moving the finish line, you know, so I keep doing that. I think the way is to know, to see, to feel, to engage with Carmen, people all over the country who are screening it. When you start to get emails and you start to get letters and people telling you, we screened the film and this or that happened, or I watched it, and most importantly, I then did the following. Do one thing that you hadn't done before watching the film and let Carmen know. That will keep all of us at Brave New Films fed in the deeply profound sense feed us by the one action. And equally important, Kimber will use those comments, we can take your names off or not, to allow us to fundraise so we can keep doing this and keep doing this and keep spreading the word. So think about one action that each of you does. And that certainly, I remember back when we did the film about drones and we screened it at a military academy, and we got the most extraordinary letters from people in the military about that film and its impact on them. Similarly, we have a film out now on misdemeanors, racial justice, and the 10 million people in the carceral system because of misdemeanors. And the letters and the emails and the actions taken really have a profound effect. And many of you may think, well, I'm not CBS or I'm not NBC or how, I've got my 130 people. There have been study after study after study around what they call in advertising land the trusted messenger theory, which is often the person with the 130 will have more impact on those 130 than any of the big dogs with their canned and repetitive advertisements. So again, it's an argument, it's a plea, it's an urging to not diminish, to not limit how impactful you can be in your circle, not having to look at, many of us do too often, got to change the world tomorrow, in your circle, with your group, with your synagogue, with your church, with your mosque, with your school.
Robert, thank you for your words and your call to action. As I used to speak to my staff and I speak to my students, the way I phrase it, everyone can make a difference. It's about figuring out where you sit. And at the same time, these are tough times, but we have to celebrate small successes. The kind of experiences you're having with the film indeed is part of that small success. We have a little more time and there are more questions. So here's a different angle. The questionnaires states there are personal stories like those of elderly voters and disabled people being unable to register or vote. Are you including those kinds of stories in your film? Elderly voters and disabled folks?
Yes, I mean, you saw I don't know if it's in the 6-minute, but in the 30-minute version, we have probably, to me, maybe one of the most moving stories of a gentleman who didn't have a car, and he was an elderly gentleman, and by moving his polling place, they were stopping from voting. Someone who had voted for 40 years or something. And for the revised film, and again, you can be in touch with Carmen, who's working very hard in addition to screenings to help us find stories in key states. If you know someone elderly, disabled, or any other iteration, email her and somebody from the production team will be in touch. We have about another week or so where we're looking for stories. Then we have to stop because we're on a deadline to get the film out and finished by the first week of April. But if you have more of those, contact us. But Carmen, you want to talk a little bit about the search for stories and what you've been doing with the team?
Sure. Yes, we've been reaching out to organizations and relationships that we already have in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. We've got some good stories out of Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Arizona continues to be a challenging state. We're not sure what's happening with the Arizona in terms of folks willing to talk. But if you know of any folks that are connected specifically to some of the indigenous groups out in Arizona who are on reservations and are really impacted by some of these new laws, please reach out to myself, Robert, and we can certainly forward the information to our production team.
Okay. Robert, we have time for a couple more questions. This is a strong one. I'm just going to read it. What horrific consequences should be considered as we motivate action? In other words, I'm assuming that the questionnaire is saying we keep losing. What happens if we lose? What do we do? So I have some thoughts on that, but I'll give it to you.
I would say two things. First of all, the assumption of the question is that by emphasizing potential horrific results, we motivate people. That's not completely clear, by the way. Certainly, it can be an element of motivation, but at the times we're in, it can also be a way to dampen people's effort to do anything. The sort of the world is falling, or the boy who cried wolf too often, or I joke about it, and unfortunately, some of it is all too true. This is the most important election of your life. So I would, and I will answer, but I would first say, I encourage folks not to focus just on the horrific, because also it's a big motivator. The positive, when doing work has led to X, Y, or Z, whether it's, again, a piece of legislation, a hot meal, a student loan that's been poorly or fraudulently executed, that's been eliminated. The specifics of people's lives can be as motivating or more. On the horrific consequences, once people are entrenched, we see in many cities and many states the efforts that they're going through voter suppression, through gerrymandering, through terror tactics of a kind, intimidating people who volunteer and work at the polls. We will see more and more of that. People in power, unfortunately, even when they're elected, do not give up that power if they feel there's a way to keep it. And our job is to take that on, to challenge it, because the longer they're there, the more power they have, the more we will see laws and practices and actions that will be racist, that will be taking advantage of those with less economic power, and will make the inequality worse and worse and more structural in this country.
Powerful words. And I would say, Robert, I believe, and I know you believe, that you dedicated your career as a filmmaker and as an organizer to empower all of us and to provide the rights that all the residents of our country deserve. That we need to celebrate success. And to me, success is the experience this morning. So as we bring this to a close, I want to thank you, Robert, for your leadership, for your sharp elbows, which we surely need. I want to thank you, Carmen, for your organizing efforts. And of course, Brave New Films for today's call to action. I also want to thank our committee members, Andrea Mark, Barbara Levinson, Anita Penstein, Howard Lando, and of course, Carl Selkin. When we came together 6 weeks ago in the shadow of the loss in the Senate, I would say that some of us in the moment felt despondent that we couldn't make a difference. But one of my colleagues spoke up and said, we need to fight back. That is our right. That is our responsibility. That in and of itself is empowering. And that's where each of us can make a difference based on who we are and how we live our lives. So it can be a time for hope and empowering. So on a more practical level, I want to remind you to look in your email for our discussion and resource guide. Discussion guide from Brave New Films, which lists national organizations, and a resource guide that we have compiled, including a list of audience recommended organizations mobilizing against voter suppression. It provides opportunities to work with organizations and to be involved in the fight against voter suppression. In addition, as Carl noted at the beginning of our hour, there's a YouTube version of today's film, as well as the previous 2020 film. So in addition, as we close, I want to thank all of our organizational partners for today's event, in particular, Jews United for Democracy and Justice, JUDJ. Contact information for JUDJ is in your Q&A. And finally, Brave New Films, as Robert mentioned earlier in our hour, is a nonprofit organization. It depends on community support to raise the issues, to raise the questions, to empower communities. And it depends on community support to continue its work showing films like Suppression 2021, The War on Democracy. So I want to note that there is a link to Brave New Films, which is posted in your Q&A. And that link will also be sent to you when, as a participant this morning, you receive your discussion and resource guide. So with that, I thank you all for spending our time together. I thank Brave New Films, and again, Robert, for your vision, Carmen, for your hard work, all of you for giving the time. So thank you all. Let's get to work.
Thank you.
Thank you.